The night she dragged a dented stovepipe down Main Street with a busted wheelbarrow and her newborn tied to her chest, every man on the porch of Mortar's saloon howled. They said she'd freeze by November. Said a woman alone couldn't build a cabin, let alone patch one together out of thrown-away parts. But she didn't stop walking, didn't even flinch when the pipe slipped loose and clanged like church bells on the frozen dirt. She just picked it up again and kept going, wind stinging her face, baby muffled tight in old wool. Her boots were too big, her dead husband's, and she walked like she was wading through someone else's footsteps. That's how the widow first entered the canyon, not with a wagon or a team, or a man to cut trees for her, just junk, grit, and the kind of eyes folks didn't want to look too long into. She went by Widow Jameson, though nobody recalled if Jameson had been a first or last name, or if he'd ever really existed. The story changed, depending who was telling it. Some said she'd come from Kansas, others from a flooded farm near the Salt Fork. Some claimed she'd buried a child already, or a husband, or both. But the part that stayed true, no matter who was speaking, was that she built her whole cabin out of junk. That first week, she scoured the dump behind Whitaker's Supply for rusted roofing tin and busted doors thrown out after the spring storm. She found bent nails by torchlight, holding her baby on one hip while sifting old crates with the other. Sometimes she'd hum while she worked, real quiet. Sometimes not. A few folks tried offering help, not kindly, but condescending, the way you offer help to a dog too dumb to leave a porcupine alone. She said no every time, said she'd built things before, though she never said what. By mid-September, the frame of her shelter stood crooked along the rock wall, at the east edge of the canyon, where nobody else dared to build. The spot flooded every third year. It sat in shade by afternoon. Wind slammed that wall in winter so hard you could hear it whine like something dying. That's where she built. Scraps of freight crates for walls, roofing tar dabbed over holes in rusted metal. A door that had once been the tailgate of a wagon now hung sideways on leather straps. And the stove, oh that stove, was 3 broken pieces riveted together from different models. One part still had the name Franklin etched in it. Another was scorched near clean through. She patched the burn hole with a flattened coffee tin nailed into place. Kids used to sneak out and peer from the ridge just to laugh. "Looks like a chicken coop fell down a hill," one boy said. "I bet the roof leaks like a bucket full of buckshot." But she kept working, day after day. And when frost came early that October, when the menfolk were still cutting firewood and rushing to seal their own cabins, a wisp of smoke began rising steady from her stovepipe. Not much, but steady. Blue smoke, dry, the kind that meant the fire was hot and the chimney was drawing. It didn't seem right to anyone. A chimney made from warped stovepipe, bent joints, tied up with wire like a stitched wound. It shouldn't have drawn clean like that, and yet it did. Old Mabel Cartwright, who lived closest and had always been the one to take her pot of beans to sick neighbors, swore she saw the widow outside one dawn, bare hands steaming, pressing her palm against the east wall of her junk cabin. Not inside, outside, like she was feeling for warmth, like something in that wall was holding heat, Mabel told the others. They all scoffed, except they didn't, not really. That week, one by one, the neighbors started walking the long way just to pass her place. Some claimed they heard baby laughter inside, unmistakable, not crying, laughter. Others said they saw a strange flicker through the cracks in her tarred window panes, like a pulsing warmth, not just light. By November, the snow came sudden, hard, the worst since '73. 3 feet in 2 days, then a freeze that turned every hill into a glass slope. The wind came next, tore through like knives. One family lost their whole roof. Another had to huddle with neighbors after their stove cracked from sudden cold. Babies got sick. Men blistered their hands trying to fell greenwood for heat. And then came the widow. She walked into town with her baby wrapped so deep you could hardly tell there was a child beneath. But the child's cheeks were pink, not frozen, pink, healthy. She walked slow, calm, and went straight to the church steps, where the sick children and desperate families had gathered in blankets. "I boiled water all night," she said. "You can take it. I got heat to spare." Folks stared at her like she'd grown a second head. One of the ranchers, Calloway, got close enough to smell her clothes. He said she didn't smell like smoke, not really, more like metal and pine and something else, something hot and clean, like dry rocks near a canyon fire. He followed her back up the trail just to see for himself, and that's when he saw the thing no one had noticed. Her cabin wall, the one facing the canyon's east rock, was covered in glass, not window glass, bottles, hundreds of them, green and brown and clear, set sideways and mortared with old clay, all arranged like honeycomb across the wall, their bottoms facing out. out, not one alike, some chipped, some sealed, some filled with dark sand. Calloway asked what it was. She didn't answer. He asked again. She only said, keeps the wind out, brings the light in. But it wasn't just wind she'd beat, or snow, or cold. Her cabin had stayed warm because it caught the morning sun like a magnifying glass. Those bottles, set into the junked wall, held warmth. The tarred cracks, the sealed seams, the strange layered insulation from broken crates and rags and who knows what else. She'd built a heat trap, an oven, an ass thing nobody in town understood, but everyone suddenly wanted. Calloway spread the word. Men started sneaking up the trail after dark just to peer through the glass wall. One got caught. She made him carry stones for her next project. He didn't complain. The widow, once mocked, was now whispered about like a legend, not with praise, with fear, because the freeze got worse, and her cabin only grew warmer. And that was when the disappearances began. The first to go missing was Josiah Pender, a boy of 12 who'd been sent to fetch firewood from the tree line before dawn. His mother found only the axe, stuck straight into a stump, the blade frosted, untouched by snow. The boy's boot tracks led halfway to the trail near the widow's ridge, and then nothing, just wind-swept white. The sheriff, old Calvin Bricks, rode out with a lantern that night, muttering curses under his breath about damned cold and foolish womancraft. He passed the widow's cabin but didn't knock. He claimed later that the windows were dark, but Mabel Cartwright swore she saw a glow from inside. Not firelight, something different, like the shimmer of heated glass, or light bouncing in too many directions at once. Josiah was never found. The town held its breath after that. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Men double-checked door latches and nailed blankets over windows. The widow became the subject of a dozen theories. Some said she'd cast a charm from the junkyard. Others believed the bottles on her walls were filled with spirits, and not the kind you drink. But even in their fear, no one could ignore the simple, awful truth. Her baby wasn't coughing, while theirs wheezed and burned with fever. Her stove never stopped smoking, while theirs sputtered and died by morning, and her roof never cracked, never sagged, never let in so much as a shiver of wind. Then came the second storm, worse than the first. It hit in the second week of December with winds that sounded like screaming. Houses groaned, window glass spider-webbed, chickens froze solid in their coops, 2 cabins collapsed entirely, crushing supplies, injuring children. A horse was found dead upright in the snow, eyes iced over, frozen where it stood. For the first time in years, the church bell stayed silent. Even Pastor Earl said it felt like the world had tilted wrong. He'd never seen a sky so white it looked blue. That storm took 3 lives before morning, and yet the widow's junk cabin still smoked, still held. Sheriff Bricks finally knocked on her door after the 3rd death. No one saw him go, but he came back pale, lips cracked, silence clinging to him like soot. When pressed, he said only, "She's warm, and the child's alive. That's all that matters." But it wasn't, because by then, others were vanishing too. Animals first, then the man who owned them. Ezekiel Boone had 6 goats and a mule. His barn was found wide open one morning, door swinging loose, snow untracked, the animals gone. Boone too, no struggle, no blood, just a note nailed to the frame. Too cold, not worth staying, except it wasn't Boone's handwriting. His brother swore it, and the town had known Ezekiel 30 years. He couldn't spell worth properly even if you paid him. So what happened to Ezekiel? Some said he'd wandered to the widow's cabin, begged for warmth, got let in, never came back out. Others whispered worse, that she didn't let anyone in, that something else was keeping them from leaving. It was Clara Dunleavy, the youngest schoolteacher in the county, who noticed the heat ripple. She'd been walking the ridge, hoping to find tracks after a boy in her class never came home. The wind cut through her shawl like knives, but then, in a sudden lull, she paused and saw it, a shimmer on the rocks near the widow's wall. Not smoke, not fire, a distortion, like how air warps above an oven. She got closer, saw the glass bottles on the wall glowing, faintly, even in the snow, even at dusk. And then, through a crack between 2 crates nailed haphazard along the cabin's south face, she saw movement. But it wasn't the widow. It was something taller. Word spread fast. Clara's report fractured the town. Half demanded the sheriff tear the cabin apart. The other half, desperate and freezing, wanted only to beg for shelter inside it. Sheriff Bricks refused both. "She's warm, and she's got a child," he repeated. "We leave her be." But the town didn't. They sent a man that night, Truman Dyer, a trapper from the North Woods. He knocked, said he wanted to trade meat for fire. She didn't open the door. He knocked again, harder, no answer. He tried the latch. The door opened before he touched it. Inside, it was quiet, too quiet. He stepped over the threshold, boots crunching against something that sounded brittle. Not ice, not glass. Bones, not human, not exactly. When he returned, he didn't speak. He just packed his sled, hitched his dogs, and left. No one saw him again. The next morning, fresh prints in the snow led from the widow's cabin to the Dunleavy schoolhouse. Inside, Clara was gone. Her coat still hung by the door, her boots still warm, but in the corner of the classroom, drawn in soot across the blackboard, was a perfect outline of her body, arms outstretched, fingers splayed, eyes wide, like a shadow, cast not by light, but by heat. That was when the townspeople broke, not in anger, in fear. A meeting was called. Pastor Earl, Sheriff Bricks, and 20 others gathered in the church basement with candles and blankets, breath fogging in the air. "What is she?" someone asked. "Not what?" said Mabel Cartwright. "What did she build?" Silence followed, because no one could deny it now. Her cabin, scrap heap though it was, held something inside it, something that survived the worst storm in 20 years, something that didn't breathe smoke or flicker like fire, but radiated. "She built a furnace," someone whispered. "No," said Pastor Earl, shaking his head slowly. "She built a womb." They all stared. "For what?" someone asked. The pastor said nothing, but in the candlelight, his eyes didn't blink for a very long time. The next morning, all the children were gone. Their tracks led toward the ridge, straight to her door. No one saw them return. No one ever saw them again, except one. A boy named Eli, no older than 7, stumbled back into town 2 days later, barefoot, coatless, cheeks flushed with impossible warmth. He collapsed outside the general store, clutching something wrapped in burlap. When they opened it, they found a bundle of black stones, warm to the touch, pulsing. Eli wouldn't speak for hours. When he did, he whispered 2 things. "She let us play inside the light," and "She's not cold inside." The stones were buried. The boy, taken in by Mabel Cartwright. The town tried to move on, but from then on, every winter, smoke still rose from the widow's chimney, even after no one saw her again, even after the cabin should have collapsed from age, even after the wind turned cruel and the canyon iced over. That smoke still curled into the sky, thin, blue, steady, like breath from something that would not die. The third winter came colder than the last. Snow stacked to the eaves in 2-day storms. Livestock froze where they stood. Chimneys clogged with ice so thick men died trying to punch through it from inside. The postman stopped riding in from Eagle's Fork entirely. His last note, pinned to the church door with a carpenter's nail, read only, "Route unpassable. You're on your own." And yet that strange, broken cabin of salvage scrap still stood, lopsided, patchworked, blackened with age, but always breathing heat into the air like the thing had lungs beneath its floorboards. The bottle walls still glinted in the pale sun, catching what little warmth the frozen sky offered, and trapping it within. People had stopped calling her the widow by then. They didn't call her anything. They just said her. "Is she still up there? Did you see her light last night? I heard her baby again." But no one had seen her face in over a year. Not since the last child walked into that place and never came back. Her door was never shut with a latch. That was the worst part. It just hung there, slightly ajar, tilted inward, as if inviting, as if daring. One man, Luther Hodge, made the mistake of walking all the way up to it one dry January afternoon when the wind had died and the cold made no sound. He said the door swung open slowly before he even knocked. Inside, he saw a chair rocking by itself. Then the air hit him, warm and wet, like stepping into a forge room. But it wasn't fire, he said, not wood smoke. It was something thicker, a heat that wrapped around his skin and pressed against his thoughts, like memory and dream and terror, all brewed into vapor. He didn't walk inside, not fully, but he saw what was on the far wall. It looked like glass at first, then like metal, then not like anything he had words for. Not a wall, not a mirror, not a door, something else, shifting, humming softly, like a held breath. He ran. When he got back to town, he'd bit his own tongue near clean through, couldn't speak right for weeks. And after that, he never said her name again. Spring thaw brought little comfort. Floods tore through the valley, ripping away fences, topsoil, entire sheds. The river bloated over its banks and stole half the grain. Still, the widow's cabin, built on mud, lashed to rock with rope and wire and old leather belts, didn't budge. The glass bottle wall held like stone. Her stove, that monstrous stitched-together thing, kept puffing quietly into the warming sky. Then came the spring sickness. It struck the children first. High fevers, eyes rolled back, breathing that came in short, rattling gasps. Nothing helped. Not boiled willow bark, not snowpack to the chest, not prayers. 3 mothers buried their babies by the first full moon of May, but not Mabel Cartwright, because Mabel Cartwright had Eli, the boy who'd returned from her house barefoot and full of heat. And Eli did not get sick. In fact, he never shivered again. Not once. Not even in the coldest nights when the fire died out and the walls howled. When Mabel's stove failed in the dead of night, Eli stood up, barefoot again, and walked outside. She followed him, cried out, pleaded, but he didn't turn around. He walked past the fences, past the road, toward the ridge. She stopped at the edge, heart pounding. He turned back and smiled. Steam curled from his skin, rising off his shoulders like he was standing in a bath. His breath didn't fog. His eyes had gone the color of morning frost. "I'm not cold," he whispered. She fixed it. He vanished over the ridge. Mabel collapsed. They found her hours later, hands frozen to her own arms, lips blue, mind broken. She lived, but never spoke again. Not in words anyone understood, just bottle sounds, little hums, clicks, whispers in glass. They tried to burn the cabin that summer. It was Sheriff Bricks's idea. His hair had gone white. His voice rasped now, like wind through nails. He gathered 4 men, all of them swearing they'd rather die hot than live cold in fear of that thing. They rode up with oil and torches, hammers and pickaxes. Town watched them go in silence. No one followed. From the ridge, smoke could be seen, black at first, then coppery, then white, but no flames, and no men returned, except Bricks. He came back 3 days later, walking without boots. His feet were burned black, his hands peeled in layers like tree bark in drought, but his eyes were wide open, not with madness, with clarity, like someone who'd just remembered what the world really looked like and couldn't forget again. "She doesn't burn," he said. Then he dropped dead in front of the church. After that, no one approached the cabin again, but it kept smoking. It puffed that same steady ribbon into the sky, winter or not. Always at the same time every day, morning, noon, dusk, like it was breathing. Some children still whispered that you could hear singing from the walls when the wind turned east. Not voices, not music, but something like both. A hum in the bones, like something warm and waiting. Old Mrs. Gaither claimed she saw the baby once, peering through the bottle wall, eyes like polished river stones, skin not pale, not red, but glowing faintly like warm wax in a lantern, smiling. She died of a heart attack the next day. The children stopped playing near the ridge. Folks started building new homes further down valley, closer to the dry riverbed, where the wind didn't carry strange echoes. The town began to forget her name, and eventually they forgot their own shame. But the cabin stayed, decades passed. New settlers came. They asked why no one lived near the East Ridge. The old folks just shook their heads and said, "Some houses aren't homes, some are traps." But that wasn't true either, because on the coldest nights, when firewood was too wet, when the sky cracked with frost, when newborns cried and even hope grew stiff from cold, some desperate soul would always look to the ridge, and they'd see it, that little scrap cabin, still standing, still warm, still waiting. They called it the last warm house, but no one said it out loud anymore. By the time 2 generations had passed, the stories blurred into warnings, and the warnings into silence. There was no sign left of the widow herself. No one could even say for sure if she'd died, or left, or was ever real to begin with. Her name had vanished, erased not by malice but by time and fear. But the cabin never collapsed, never faltered. Its junkyard bones remained locked in place, weathered, rusted, but impossibly whole, still up on that ridge where no one dared build, still with the same wall of bottles, still warm. The land changed around it. Forests climbed back up the slopes. Coyotes grew bold again. New fences traced new lines across the valley, enclosing nothing. The town had thinned by then. A few farms, a schoolhouse that reopened under a different name, a faded church whose bell no longer rang. The winters, though, those didn't change. If anything, they worsened. And when they did, people whispered again, always when the frost cracked the window panes, always when children cried through the night and the fire didn't catch. "She was smarter than us," someone muttered. "No, just stranger." But none went up the ridge, not after what happened to old Jonas Hill. Jonas had been a rational man, or thought he was, taught science in the schoolhouse, refused prayer, scoffed at the town's myths. He came from east of the river where folks built with stone and mathematics, and didn't believe in ghosts. He called the widow's cabin a clever hoax, something cobbled by a survivalist before their time, clever with insulation and glass. He wanted to study it, sketch it, measure the heat retention. That winter, he packed a satchel with tools, slung a thermometer from his coat, and walked up to the ridge during a snow squall, said he'd be back by supper. They found his satchel 4 days later, propped against a fence post, neatly zipped, bone dry despite the snow. His boots were beside it, soles down, laces neatly tucked inside, as if placed there, as if arranged, but no tracks led to or from that place. Only one note inside the bag, written in shaking pencil on a scrap torn from a textbook. "It's not heat, it's memory. It's preserved. She built a place time can't find." He was never seen again. That was the last real attempt to enter the cabin. From then on, it was just a fixture in the valley, a shape against the sunrise. The first wisp of smoke people saw when frost painted the ground. A landmark in the soul, not on the map. Some called it a warning, others a mercy, but no one ever dared get close again. And yet, the strange thing was this. Every child in the valley knew how to draw it, even those who'd never been told. It showed up in their scribbles on barn walls, in school margins, in frost traced across cold windows. A lopsided house with a glowing wall of circles. Sometimes there was a baby drawn inside it, sometimes a woman's face, never the same, never clear, but always smiling. One year, a preacher from the north came through, full of fire and vinegar. He saw the drawing on the schoolhouse door and demanded it be scraped off, called it idolatry, said no structure but God's house should hold such power, said he'd cast out the lingering filth of that witch's lair. He walked up the ridge with a Bible in one hand and a jug of kerosene in the other. No one stopped him, no one joined him either. By evening, smoke curled up from the ridge like always, the same pale line, but now, alongside it rose a second. For the first time in 100 years, two chimneys smoked side by side, twin ribbons against the amber dusk. The preacher was never seen again, but a week later a new crate appeared beside the cabin's door. Its lid wasn't nailed, its contents were dry. Inside, 3 Bibles, still warm, and folded beneath them, the preacher's scarf, clean, pressed and neatly sewn with thread. The thread glowed. No one claimed the crate. It stayed there through snow and thaw, slowly collapsing, wood returning to rot. But the scarf never faded. By the 4th generation, nobody in town remembered the cabin's builder. They just called it the warm place. Not a name exactly, a placeholder for something you didn't want to define, like hunger or grief or love. A young girl named Ruthie found herself staring up at the ridge more often than she should have. Her mother worked the schoolhouse. Her father fixed broken stoves for those who couldn't pay. They lived simple, slept close in the winter months, boiled snow to stretch the water. But Ruthie didn't shiver, never had. And when she was 7, she started drawing circles, hundreds of them, bottles. She covered walls in chalk lines that looped and laced until her fingertips bled. Her teacher grew concerned. Her parents said she just had strong imagination. Then one day she drew the cabin perfectly from memory, down to the cracked roofline, the bent stovepipe, the angle of the doorway. She had never seen it. No one had shown her. No picture existed. No story told in her home. And when asked how she knew, Ruthie said this: "I remember the warmth before I was born." Her parents pulled her from school, took down the drawings, forbade any mention of the cabin. But 2 months later, in the deep frost of February, Ruthie vanished from her bed, left behind only a single page drawn in charcoal, the cabin, with all its walls intact. But this time, it had grown taller, a 2nd floor, made entirely of bottles. That was when people began to see the changes, subtle but undeniable. The bottle wall now stretched around more of the structure. The stovepipe stood straighter. The roof had been patched. Junk still clung to the frame. Wagon boards, torn tarps, rusted hinges, but arranged now with more care, as if someone was rebuilding it or finishing it. And from time to time, folks claimed they saw figures moving through the bottle wall, not just the widow, not just the child, others, more, all the ones who had vanished, still alive, ghosts or just memories, held warm like dried fruit, like summer air in a sealed jar. No one knew, but the light from the cabin changed. It was no longer just a flicker. Now it pulsed, like a heartbeat. Some argued to destroy it again, call for fire, dynamite, tear it down to prove it was just timber and tin. But there was no anger left in the town, only resignation and awe, because for all the fear it once caused, the cabin had never hurt them. It had never asked for anything, never made threats. It had simply been warm when no one else could be. That counted for something. Even the most hardened voices began to say it. She built it for her child. Maybe it kept her alive. Maybe she became it, so they left it alone. And year after year, the cabin breathed, soft, steady. And then one day, something changed. The smoke stopped. It happened without warning. One autumn, the frost returned as expected. The winds howled as they always did, and yet the cabin's chimney stood cold, still. No smoke rose, no bottle glowed. The structure remained untouched, uncollapsed, but lifeless. No warmth, no hum, no light, just stillness. Fear crept back in, but this time, not the same kind. It wasn't dread, it was loss. They waited a week, then a month, then the whole of winter. Still nothing. And when spring came, a few brave souls walked up the ridge, the first in nearly 100 years. They found the door ajar, like always. Inside, no bodies, no bones, no child, no woman, but also no junk, no bottle wall, no patched crates, no scavenged tin. The whole cabin, every nail, every beam, every hunk of scrap was gone. What remained was only an outline burned into the dirt, a foundation scorched black into the frozen clay. in the shape of that lopsided house, perfectly warm to the touch. The widow's cabin had vanished, or moved on, or fulfilled its purpose. But in the years that followed, something stranger happened. Children in the valley stopped freezing, even when their homes failed, even when the frost turned to glass and the sky went black with cold. They would wake in the morning, dry and warm, breath soft, cheeks flushed, and always when asked how, they'd say the same thing. She kept us warm, not mother, not God, not the fire. They never knew her name, but somehow they still remembered. Years passed. The last old-timers who'd whispered of the cabin died in their sleep, most of them with their backs warm and their hands curled toward where a stove should have gone out hours before. The stories scattered into dust, folktales folded into harvest songs, warnings turned to nursery rhymes. Children sang them while stamping their feet in snowdrifts, their words half joked and half meant. Bottles in the wall, ashes in the seam, she built a cabin out of junk and dreamed. The ridge grew over, brush reclaiming what the wind hadn't. New trees clawed up from the slope, deer trails twisted through the overgrowth. But no one ever built there, not a fence post, not a garden. No one chopped the saplings either, though they were straight and strong. They called it dead land, land too warm for roots to hold, though no one tested it until the government men came. It was summer, dry, dust crusted along the window panes. A new road had carved its way through the hills to bring in telephone poles and mineral surveys. Two men in clean boots and clipped vowels parked their jeep in front of the old mercantile and began asking questions. They wore uniforms, though not army ones, dark green with brass buttons and insignia that meant nothing to the people here. They asked about elevation, soil composition, wind direction, and heat. "We've got a thermal mapping satellite image here," one of them said, holding out a clipboard with a smooth printed sheet. It showed the valley in tones of grey and blue, but the ridge, just one precise spot along it, was bright red. "There's geothermal activity here, unexplained. We believe it might be an underground vent." People stared. No one answered. "Look, we're just looking to drill a few cores, shallow ones, 2 days' work. You folks'll never know we were here." Someone finally spoke up. "There's nothing up there." The man tapped the red blotch on his map. "There's something." He didn't come back the next day. His partner returned alone, pale and twitching, saying only, "The ground isn't soil, it's glass." They left within the hour. Not long after that, people began building again, not on the ridge, never there, but around it. Settlers from the west, brought by cheap land deeds and the promise of high-yield grain. They didn't know the stories, didn't care. One of them, a woman named Sophie Carr, single mother of twin boys, built her cabin just down the slope. Her husband had died crossing the Brazos. She'd come north alone with nothing but 3 oxen and a wagon of salvaged wood. When the snow came fast that year, before she'd finished her roof, she huddled her boys under straw and prayed. They didn't freeze. Her fire burned out in the night, but the air stayed warm. And in the morning, just outside the unfinished wall, she found a single bottle sitting upright in the snow. It was green glass, thick and cloudy, still warm to the touch. The cork sealed tight with wax. Inside, a fine black dust. She kept it. Years later, her sons would both say it was the warmest winter of their lives, and they never forgot the bottle. Others found them too. Bottles, always after a hard frost, always after a prayer or a sob, or a silence stretched too long in the dark. Some found them corked, others open, some glowed faintly, others hummed, no two alike. People stopped questioning it. They called them widow bottles, said they were left for those in need. Not money, not strength, just need. No one ever saw who left them. But if you cracked one open in the deep of night, and held it close, they said you could hear it. Not just heat, not just a whisper, but a heartbeat. Then came the museum woman. Her name was Dr. Irene Blas. She wore leather gloves and a hat too wide, and she talked with the authority of someone used to being the smartest voice in the room. She'd heard rumors from a fellow archaeologist about the thermal anomaly site up near Red Hollow. She said she was looking for frontier resilience artifacts, claimed she'd heard of a cabin built entirely from salvaged refuse. A miracle of frontier ingenuity, said she'd come to document it for history's sake. She paid for her lodgings in gold coin. She hiked to the ridge with a surveyor's kit and a camera. She was back within an hour, shaking and silent, her lenses fogged, her breath short. She didn't speak for 2 days. When she finally did, it was to leave a note in the church vestibule, written in slow, painstaking script. "The house is gone, but the shape remains, and inside it, something older than heat, older than grief. She built a chamber for memory, for love, sealed so tight it outlived its owner. If you ever doubted ghosts, don't. She is warmth itself now." She returned east, but before she left, she placed something in the offering box, a green bottle, sealed, still warm. Seasons turned, the valley softened. Old scars grew over. Children were born who would never know the name of the woman who had once scraped broken stove parts from the dirt with frozen hands, a baby tied to her chest. But the warmth remained. They said if you stood very still on the east ridge, where nothing grew, and placed your hand to the earth, you could feel a low thrum beneath your fingers, like something enormous sleeping, not malevolent, not divine, just there, waiting. Some claimed it was a buried furnace. Some claimed the ground had memory. Others, usually quiet, said that grief like hers doesn't just vanish, it settles, finds a shape, becomes structure, and when that grief is fused with love, it becomes shelter. Long after most homes had gone electric and the world moved on from stoves and bottle walls, there were still some winters when the power died, and the roads iced, and the wind howled louder than prayer. And in those years, if a cabin sat dark and hopeless, and a mother knelt alone, beside her child's still form, there'd be a knock, soft, not from the door, from beneath the floorboards. And when she looked, there might be nothing, or maybe a bottle, just one, placed gently in the ashes of a cold hearth. No note, no voice, just warmth, always warmth, so they can laugh. They can call it superstition, call it junk, call her crazy, but every cabin that ever stayed warm passed when it should have. Every child that woke dry and safe when they shouldn't have. Every mother who found just enough heat to last the night. They know better. They know the truth. She built that cabin from the trash the world threw away. She patched it with rust and wire and grief. She lit the stove with memory. And what she built outlasted every man's home in the valley. Because while they built for winter, she built for love. And love doesn't rot. Not when it's sealed tight. Not when it's fed with fire. Not when it's wrapped in junk and held together by a mother's hands, not when it learns how to breathe. When the historian came with her satellite scans and finely bound notebooks, she said there was nothing left, no structure to study, no materials to date, no wood, no glass, no nails, nothing that could be catalogued or carried into a museum, just a patch of earth where no snow ever settled and no moss ever grew, only a perfect warmth that pulsed just beneath the topsoil, steady as a heart that had never stopped beating. She stayed longer than the others had. Days turned to weeks. She rented a room in town, quietly observed, watched the skies. She never asked many questions, but she listened. She listened when children spoke of dreams they'd all had the same night, of glowing bottles and stairways made of firelight. She listened when the oldest rancher in the valley, blind for 5 winters, turned his face toward the ridge and said, "She's moving again." On the last day before she left, the historian walked the ridge alone. No instruments, no gear, just a satchel and a journal wrapped in twine. She knelt in the center of the warmth and placed her palm to the dirt. She didn't speak, but she smiled. Then she buried her notebook there. No headstone, no plaque, no marker, just a small mound of soil smoothed flat with her bare hands. She didn't take photos. She didn't file a report. But when her colleagues asked what she found, she answered plainly, "The greatest invention never built. A home that held sorrow without burning, and heat without smoke." It wasn't architecture, it was remembrance. She never published a word about it. But the next winter, a little girl in a town 6 counties east woke in the middle of the night with frost at the corners of her bed and breath fogging in the air. And there, sitting on the hearth, though no one had placed it there, was a green bottle, small, sealed, gently glowing. Her parents never asked where it came from. They just held her close. And the house somehow stayed warm until Esp.